Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Science Vault. Personality is one of those things we encounter every single day, yet rarely stop to truly examine. We notice it in the way a friend always seems to light up a room, or in the way we ourselves tend to retreat inward after a long and busy day. We sense it, we respond to it, we are shaped by it, and yet, for most of human history, we had no precise language to describe what it actually was. So what exactly is personality? At its core, personality is the pattern of how a person thinks, feels, and behaves across time and across situations. It isn't a mood, and it isn't a phase. It's something deeper and more consistent than that, a kind of internal signature that makes you recognizably you, whether you're at work, at home, or somewhere entirely new. Personality includes both the traits you were born with and the ones that have been slowly shaped by everything you've experienced. Your early environment, your relationships, your culture, the moments that changed you, all of these leave their mark. And yet, the architecture underneath was always yours to begin with. For a long time, psychologists struggled to agree on how to measure something so vast and so personal. Different schools of thought offered different frameworks, and the field remained fragmented for decades. Then, gradually, through decades of research conducted across many countries and many cultures, something remarkable began to emerge. A consensus. Researchers kept finding the same 5 dimensions of personality appearing again and again, no matter where they looked. This became known as the Big Five model, and today it stands as the dominant framework in personality science worldwide. Not because it's perfect, but because it has proven to be remarkably consistent and remarkably useful. What makes this finding so striking is not just the model itself, it's the fact that these 5 dimensions appear to be universal. The same 5 traits seem to characterize human beings across vastly different languages, vastly different societies, vastly different ways of living. Whether researchers studied people in North America, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, or South America, the same underlying structure kept emerging from the data. This suggests something profound, that personality, in its fundamental shape, is not just a cultural invention. It appears to be something deeply human. And personality is, for the most part, stable. Not rigid. People do grow and change over time, particularly in early adulthood, but the broad contours of who you are tend to persist across the years. The shy child often grows into a quieter adult. The naturally curious teenager often becomes the lifelong learner. There is a thread of continuity that runs through a person's life, and personality is a large part of what that thread is made of. This stability has real consequences. Scientists have discovered that personality traits can predict life outcomes with surprising accuracy: how long and how healthily you live, how your relationships tend to go, how you perform in your career, how you cope when things become difficult. In some studies, personality has been shown to predict certain life outcomes just as powerfully as intelligence itself, which is a remarkable thing to sit with. The way you naturally tend to feel, and think, and engage with the world around you, it matters, in ways both large and small, across the entire arc of a life. Which naturally leads to a question that humans have wondered about for centuries. Where does personality come from? The answer, as science has come to understand it, is genuinely fascinating. Personality traits are heritable, meaning they run in families, not only because families share environments, but because they share genes. Twin studies in genetic research have consistently shown that somewhere between 40 and 60% of the variation in personality traits across people can be attributed to genetics. Nearly half of who you are, in terms of your characteristic patterns of thinking and feeling, was present in some form before you ever took your first breath. The rest is written by life itself, by everything that happens to you, around you, and because of you. And slowly, across a lifetime, those two forces, nature and experience, weave together into the person that only you can be. The story of personality doesn't begin with genetics alone, and it doesn't end there either. The other half, that remaining 40 to 60%, belongs to something far more varied, far more personal, and in many ways far more interesting. It belongs to life. From the very earliest moments of childhood, the environment around us begins its quiet work. The home we grow up in, the people who raise us, the way love is expressed or withheld, the rules we learn to live by, all of it shapes the architecture of who we become. Children are not passive recipients of their upbringing. They are actively, continuously absorbing everything around them, building internal models of what the world is like and what their place within it might be. Parents play a particularly significant role in this process. Not in a simple, deterministic way, not as sculptors who carve children into fixed shapes, but as the first and most intimate environment a child inhabits. The warmth or coolness of a parent's presence, the consistency or unpredictability of their responses, the emotional tone of daily life, these things leave impressions that researchers can still detect decades later in the personalities of fully grown adults. Discipline, too, leaves its mark. Children raised in homes where boundaries were clear but fair tend to develop differently than those raised in environments of either rigid control or complete permissiveness. The way authority was experienced in childhood, whether it felt safe, frightening, arbitrary, or loving, echoes forward through the years in ways that are subtle but measurable. It shapes how a person relates to rules, to authority, to their own sense of agency in the world. And yet, even here, the picture is more nuanced than it first appears. As people move through life, the influence of genetics on personality doesn't stay fixed. Interestingly, heritability tends to increase with age, not decrease. In early childhood, the environment is overwhelming, the family, the home, the immediate world, and it plays an enormous role in shaping who a child appears to be. But as people grow older, as they gain more freedom to choose their own environments, their own friends, their own paths through life, the underlying genetic tendencies begin to express themselves more fully. The adult you become, in other words, may actually reflect your genetic nature more honestly than the child you once were. And those genetic tendencies are remarkably consistent across the planet. When researchers examine the heritable components of personality across different countries and different populations, they find striking similarities. The same genetic patterns that contribute to openness, or conscientiousness, or emotional sensitivity in one part of the world appear to do so in another. Human beings, for all our cultural variety, are working with a surprisingly shared biological blueprint. This universality extends beyond personality traits themselves. Consider something as deeply personal as life satisfaction, that quiet inner sense of whether your life feels meaningful and good. Research suggests that roughly 47% of the variation in life satisfaction between people is heritable. Nearly half of how content or discontent a person tends to feel about their existence has roots in their biology. Which is, depending on how you look at it, either humbling or strangely reassuring. It means that the person who always seems to find a way to feel at peace is not simply lucky, or more disciplined, or trying harder. They may simply be, in part, built that way. And then came the genetic revolution. For most of history, even as scientists accepted that personality was heritable, the actual mechanics remained invisible. We knew the influence was there, but we couldn't see it. We couldn't point to the specific places in the genome where it lived. That began to change as technology advanced, as it became possible to scan not just a handful of genes, but the entire genome of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, of people at once. What emerged from that data was breathtaking in its complexity. Researchers have now identified more than 200 distinct genetic locations, called loci, that appear to be associated with personality traits. And in more detailed analyses, over 1,250 individual genetic variants have been linked to personality differences between people. Not one gene for introversion, not one gene for creativity, but an intricate, distributed web of thousands of tiny genetic influences, each contributing only a small fraction of the final picture. This is what scientists call a polygenic trait. And it means that personality is not written in a single sentence somewhere in our DNA. It is written across the entire genome, in a language of almost incomprehensible complexity, with thousands of subtle notes combining to produce something that feels, from the inside, like simply being yourself. Common genetic variants, the ones most people share, explain only a limited portion of the total variation in personality. Which tells us that much of what makes you specifically you, genetically speaking, may come from rarer and more individual combinations of variants. You are, in a very real biological sense, a genuinely unique arrangement. And then there is creativity. Of all the aspects of personality that scientists have examined through a genetic lens, creativity is one of the most intriguing. Because creativity can seem, from the outside, like something freely chosen, a skill practiced, a habit cultivated, a way of seeing that could belong to anyone willing to put in the work. And while practice and environment absolutely matter, the research suggests that the tendency toward creative thinking is, to a meaningful degree, genetically wired into a person from the very beginning. The brain of someone who scores highly on measures of creativity shows measurable structural and functional differences from those who score lower. These differences have genetic underpinnings. The capacity to make unusual connections between ideas, to find patterns where others see only noise, to be drawn toward novelty and complexity rather than comfort and familiarity. These are not purely learned behaviors. They are, in some deep and fascinating way, part of how certain people are built. Which makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of what feels like a choice, how much of what feels like passion or preference or calling, has always been quietly encoded in you, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Personality is not something that happens to us passively. It is not handed down in one complete piece, like an inheritance. It is something that unfolds over time, through the ongoing conversation between the nature we are born with and the world we are born into. And that conversation, intricate, lifelong, and entirely your own, is one of the most quietly extraordinary things about being human. For a long time, the Big Five felt like an arrival point. After decades of disagreement and competing frameworks, here at last was something solid, 5 broad dimensions that seemed to capture the essential shape of human personality. And the model has held up remarkably well. It remains the cornerstone of personality science to this day. But science, by its nature, doesn't stop moving. And as researchers continued to study personality with greater precision, using larger data sets and more sophisticated methods, they began to notice something. 5 dimensions capture the landscape at a certain altitude. But the closer you looked, the more detail appeared. It turned out that human personality was even richer, even more finely textured, than the Big Five alone could express. One of the more striking discoveries came when researchers looked beyond the 5 familiar dimensions and began cataloging the subtler, narrower traits that exist beneath them, or alongside them entirely. What they found was remarkable. More than 155 distinct personality traits have now been identified that fall outside the traditional Big Five framework. 155. Each one describing some specific, consistent pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that the broader model simply wasn't designed to capture. This doesn't mean the Big Five is wrong. It means it was always a map drawn from a certain height. And now scientists are beginning to draw maps at a much finer scale. As researchers explored the data, they also began to find structures at the other end of the spectrum, not narrower than the Big Five, but broader. When the 5 traits are analyzed together, patterns emerge suggesting that they cluster around even larger organizing principles. Some studies have identified 2 overarching metatraits sitting above the Big Five, broad enough to encompass several dimensions at once. Others have identified 3. The precise number remains a matter of ongoing discussion, but the finding itself is significant, that beneath all the variation in human personality, there may be just a handful of truly fundamental axes along which people differ. These metatraits give researchers a way to speak about personality at the highest level of abstraction. They are the widest possible lens. And they sit at the top of what scientists increasingly describe as a hierarchy, a layered structure of personality that runs from the broadest and most general at the top, down through the familiar 5 dimensions, and then further down into narrower and more specific facets. Within that hierarchy, researchers have identified 28 distinct facets, specific subdimensions nested within the Big Five, each one adding texture and precision to the broader traits they belong to. Conscientiousness, for example, is not a single undifferentiated quality. It contains within it facets like orderliness, and dutifulness, and self-discipline, and deliberateness, each one a recognizable variation on a theme, each one capable of being present in different degrees within a single person. These narrower traits, the facets, and the even finer personality nuances beneath them, are where much of the most interesting contemporary research is happening. Because it is at this level of detail that personality science begins to feel truly personal. Two people might score similarly on broad conscientiousness, yet differ enormously in their specific blend of its facets. One might be highly organized but impulsive. Another might be deeply dutiful but creatively chaotic in their personal space. The broad stroke is the same. The painting is entirely different. And alongside all of this work on the Big Five and its derivatives, other researchers have argued for models that diverge more significantly from the dominant framework. One of the older alternatives, rooted in the work of Hans Eysenck, proposed that personality could be understood through just 3 fundamental dimensions rather than 5. 2 of Eysenck's dimensions, extroversion and neuroticism, overlap substantially with the Big Five. But his third dimension, which he called psychoticism, has no clean equivalent. It captures a cluster of traits including impulsivity, sensation-seeking, and a certain disregard for social norms, qualities that don't map neatly onto agreeableness or conscientiousness, though they touch on both. The inclusion of psychoticism as a primary personality dimension remains somewhat controversial. But it raises a genuinely interesting question about how you carve up the territory of human personality, whether the Big Five's 5 cuts are the most natural ones, or whether other frameworks might illuminate different aspects of the same underlying reality. More recent models have proposed expanding the number of primary dimensions rather than reducing them. One such model identifies 6 core traits, adding a 6th dimension, called honesty-humility, to the familiar 5. This trait captures the degree to which a person is sincere, fair, and modest versus self-interested, manipulative, or status-seeking. Researchers who work with this model argue that honesty-humility represents something genuinely distinct, something that the original Big Five doesn't fully account for, and that turns out to be a meaningful predictor of real-world behavior in its own right. Then there are traits that feel almost philosophical when you first encounter them, described scientifically. Need for uniqueness is one of them. It refers to a person's consistent tendency to seek out ways of being different, to resist conformity, to want to stand apart from the crowd, not out of rebellion exactly, but out of a genuine drive toward distinctiveness. And researchers have confirmed that this is not simply a mood or a passing phase. It is a stable, measurable personality trait, with real consequences for how a person makes decisions, expresses themselves, and moves through social life. Some people need to blend in. Others need, at some level, to stand out. And that need appears to be part of who they fundamentally are. Perhaps one of the most quietly surprising discoveries in modern personality research is what scientists have come to call the 4th personality type. For a long time, researchers thought about personality primarily in terms of continuous dimensions, not in terms of distinct types. The idea that people fall into clear personality categories, like slots in a drawer, has generally been viewed with skepticism. And that skepticism is largely still warranted. But large-scale data analyses, drawing on the personality profiles of millions of people, have begun to reveal something interesting. When you look at the full population, there appear to be regions of personality space where large clusters of people naturally concentrate. One of those clusters, perhaps the largest, is what researchers have labeled the average type. Not average in the sense of dull or unremarkable, but average in the statistical sense. People who sit near the middle on most personality dimensions, neither extremely high nor extremely low on any of them. This group turns out to be surprisingly large and surprisingly coherent. It is, in some sense, the most common way to be human. And then, after all the theorizing and modeling and taxonomy building, the question becomes a practical one. How do scientists actually measure any of this? The answer is tests, carefully designed instruments that attempt to translate the invisible interior of a person's personality into something quantifiable and comparable. And two names come up again and again in any discussion of how personality is measured in practice. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, often simply called the MBTI, is probably the most widely recognized personality test in the world. It is used in workplaces and schools and self-help books and online quizzes in enormous numbers. It offers people four dichotomies: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving, and assigns them to one of 16 possible personality types. Many people find it genuinely illuminating as a tool for self-reflection, and as a shared language for talking about differences between people. The Big Five Inventory, or BFI, is a very different kind of instrument. Developed within academic psychology, it is designed not to place people into types but to measure where they fall along each of the 5 continuous dimensions. It is less poetic than the MBTI, perhaps. It doesn't give you a 4-letter code or a name to identify with. But in terms of scientific validity and predictive power, it has proven considerably more robust. It is the instrument most researchers rely on when they want to understand what personality is actually doing in a person's life. Both tests have their value. Both have their limitations. And the fact that the most popular personality test in the world is also the one that scientists most consistently criticize is itself a fascinating reflection of something, of the tension between what people find meaningful and what data can reliably confirm. Because measuring personality is not a simple thing. A person is not a fixed object sitting still to be observed. They are a living, shifting, context-sensitive being, responding differently in different moments, capable of surprising even themselves. Any test can only ever capture a partial picture, taken at a particular moment, through a particular lens. And yet the attempt to capture that picture, to describe the invisible, to measure the immeasurable, to understand what makes each person distinctively themselves, is one of the most quietly ambitious projects in all of science. Measuring personality well turns out to be harder than it looks. Not because people are unwilling to describe themselves honestly, but because self-perception has its own blind spots. We see ourselves from the inside, through years of accumulated self-narrative, and sometimes that story is more flattering, or more critical, or simply more fixed than the reality. This is one of the reasons scientists care so much about which measurement tools actually work. The Myers-Briggs, for all its popularity, has a significant limitation that researchers have documented consistently. When compared directly to the Big Five Inventory in terms of predictive power, the ability to forecast real outcomes in a person's life, their health, their relationships, their professional performance, the MBTI captures roughly half the predictive validity of its academic counterpart. Half. It isn't that the Myers-Briggs tells you nothing. It's that the Big Five tells you considerably more, with considerably greater reliability. Part of the reason comes down to structure. The MBTI places people into binary categories. You are either an introvert or an extrovert, either a thinker or a feeler. But personality doesn't actually work in neat either-or divisions. Most people sit somewhere along a continuum, and forcing that continuum into two boxes loses information. The Big Five preserves that information by treating each dimension as a spectrum, which turns out to matter enormously when you're trying to predict how a person will actually behave across the varied terrain of a real life. And then there is astrology. When researchers have directly compared different methods of predicting personality, from established psychological tests to demographic variables to various informal systems, astrology consistently lands at the bottom of the rankings. Not slightly below average. Dead last. The position of the planets and stars at the moment of a person's birth shows no meaningful statistical relationship with their personality traits, across the many studies that have tested this directly. It is a humbling result for one of humanity's oldest systems of self-understanding, and it tends to be an unpopular one. But the data has been consistent enough, and replicated enough times, that personality scientists consider the question largely settled. What astrology lacks in predictive power, the Rorschach ink blot test makes up for in a very different way. Developed in the early 20th century by Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach, the ink blot test works on a principle that is almost the opposite of a questionnaire. Rather than asking people to describe themselves directly, it presents them with a series of ambiguous, symmetrical images, shapes that could be almost anything, and asks simply, "What do you see?" The idea is that in the act of interpreting something with no fixed meaning, a person inevitably projects something of their own inner world onto it. The structure they find in the chaos, the themes that recur in their responses, the emotional tone of what they describe, all of these are thought to reflect aspects of personality and psychological functioning that a person might not be able or willing to articulate directly. The Rorschach has had a complicated history in psychology. Its scientific validity has been debated vigorously. But when used carefully, by trained clinicians, with proper scoring systems, it continues to reveal information about hidden traits, particularly in clinical settings where other tools fall short. It accesses something that questionnaires cannot always reach, the parts of a person's psychology that operate below the level of conscious self-description. And this is where another finding becomes important. Observer reports, personality assessments completed not by the person themselves, but by people who know them well, often predict real-world outcomes just as accurately as self-reports, and in some cases more so. A person's close friends, family members, or long-term colleagues sometimes have access to patterns that the person cannot see in themselves. They observe behavior across many situations in many years, without the filtering effect of self-concept or ego protection. There is something both sobering and tender about this, the idea that the people who love us may sometimes know us more clearly than we know ourselves. Which brings us to something even more immediate. Something that happens not over years, but in a fraction of a second. First impressions. Research has shown that human beings begin forming judgments about other people extraordinarily quickly. Within approximately 100 milliseconds of seeing a new face, 1/10 of a second, the brain has already generated an initial assessment. Trustworthiness, competence, warmth, dominance, these impressions crystallize almost instantaneously, well before any conversation has taken place, well before any meaningful information has been exchanged. And while these rapid judgments are not always accurate, they are surprisingly sticky. The impression formed in that first fraction of a second can persist and color everything that follows. We are, as a species, extraordinarily fast at reading each other. And some of that speed is built on something that is itself universal. Facial expressions of basic emotion appear to be the same across all human cultures. Happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise. These expressions are not learned conventions that vary from place to place. They are biological. A smile of genuine delight, a furrowing of the brow in concern, a widening of the eyes in fear, these signals are recognized consistently by people regardless of where they grew up or what language they speak. They are part of a shared human vocabulary that predates written language by an enormous margin. But reading personality, as distinct from reading a momentary emotional expression, requires something more. Researchers have found that people who score higher on certain personality dimensions, particularly openness to experience and agreeableness, tend to be more accurate at reading the personalities of others. Depth of personality, it seems, is associated with depth of perception. People who are naturally curious, empathetic, and attentive to nuance tend to pick up more information from social interactions and interpret it more accurately. They notice what others miss. They read between the lines more fluently. And remarkably, some personality information is communicated through channels we are barely conscious of. Human beings appear to be able to detect aspects of personality through scent. Studies have found that people can make above-chance judgments about certain personality traits, including extroversion and neuroticism, simply from smelling a piece of clothing worn by a stranger. The exact mechanisms behind this are not fully understood. Body chemistry varies with stress, with emotional state, with underlying biology, and it is likely that some of these variations are detectable at a level below conscious awareness. We are, in a sense, broadcasting information about ourselves through our scent without knowing it, and others are receiving that information, also without knowing it. Then there is handwriting. Graphology, the study of personality through handwriting, has a long and somewhat contentious history. In its more extravagant forms, it has made claims that science has not been able to support. But more carefully conducted research has found that certain handwriting characteristics do carry genuine personality information. The size of a person's letters, the pressure they apply to the page, the regularity or irregularity of their script, the spacing between words, these subtle physical choices reflect something real about the person making them. Not a complete psychological portrait, but a partial, genuine signal. And even something as seemingly trivial as a favorite color carries a faint whisper of personality information. Research into color preferences has found modest but consistent associations with personality traits. People who prefer blue tend to score somewhat higher on measures of conscientiousness and agreeableness. Those drawn to red often show higher levels of extroversion and sensation-seeking. The associations are not strong enough to be predictive in any meaningful individual sense. Your preference for green does not reveal your deepest psychological nature. But across large populations, the patterns are consistent enough to be real. What all of this suggests, taken together, is something both fascinating and slightly vertiginous. We are constantly broadcasting. Through our faces, our voices, our scent, the way we write, the colors we choose, the way we move through a room, we are transmitting information about who we are at every moment, through more channels than we are consciously aware of. And others are receiving that information, processing it, building impressions, in some cases before we have spoken a single word. Personality is not a private possession locked safely inside us. It leaks. It radiates outward, in all directions, continuously. And the people who are best at reading it, who catch the subtlest signals, who sense what most others overlook, may simply be the ones paying the kind of deep, patient, genuinely curious attention that the world so rarely slows down enough to offer. There is something quietly remarkable about the idea that personality doesn't stay contained within us, that it doesn't only reveal itself in the big, deliberate moments of our lives, but seeps into the smallest, most unconscious corners of daily existence. Consider sleep. Most people have a preferred sleeping position, a default shape the body naturally settles into at the end of the day. And researchers have found that these positions, seemingly chosen by comfort alone, carry faint but measurable associations with personality. People who sleep curled on their side in the fetal position tend to score higher on measures of sensitivity and a tendency toward introversion. Those who sleep flat on their back, open and expansive, often show traits associated with confidence and a certain comfort with being seen. Stomach sleepers tend toward higher levels of sociability and a more anxious relationship with criticism. The associations are not absolute. A single sleeping position is not a personality diagnosis, but they are consistent enough across research to suggest that even in unconsciousness, in the complete absence of any social performance, something of who we are finds a way to express itself. And if sleep positions feel like an unusual place to look for personality, consider something even more unlikely. The direction in which a person hangs their toilet paper roll, over the top, or underneath, has been studied as a possible reflection of personality. And the findings, while modest, are genuinely interesting. People who hang the paper over the top tend to score somewhat higher on measures of dominance, assertiveness, and a preference for things being done a particular way. Those who hang it underneath tend to show slightly higher agreeableness and a more easygoing relationship with how things are arranged. It seems almost too small a thing to carry any meaning at all. And yet, personality is precisely the kind of force that operates at every level, from the largest life decisions down to the most unremarkable habits of an ordinary Tuesday. Because personality doesn't clock out. It is present in everything. Music is one of the most vivid examples of this. The music a person loves is not random. It is not simply a matter of what they happened to hear first or what was popular when they were young, though those things do play a role. At a deeper level, musical preference reflects personality in remarkably consistent ways. People high in openness to experience tend to be drawn to music that is complex, unconventional, or emotionally intense: jazz, classical, folk, experimental genres, music that demands something from the listener. People high in extroversion gravitate toward energetic, rhythmically driving music, the kind that fills a room and pulls people together. Those higher in conscientiousness often prefer music with clear structure and a certain orderliness. And people higher in emotional sensitivity tend to seek out music that mirrors and validates their inner emotional world, music that feels like it understands them. The relationship between music and personality runs in both directions. The music we choose reflects who we are, but it also shapes how we feel in the moment, and over time, repeated listening to certain kinds of music may reinforce certain emotional patterns. What we play on a quiet evening alone, or on a long drive, or in the background while we work, none of it is as neutral as it seems. Food choices carry a similar signature. Researchers studying the relationship between personality and eating behavior have found that openness to experience is one of the strongest predictors of dietary adventurousness. People who score high in openness are significantly more likely to seek out unfamiliar cuisines, to try foods they've never encountered, to find genuine pleasure and novelty on the plate. For them, an unfamiliar ingredient or an unusual flavor combination is an invitation rather than a risk. People lower in openness tend to prefer the familiar, the foods they grew up with, the meals they know and trust, the flavors that feel like home. This is not a deficiency. It is a consistent expression of a deeper orientation toward the world. And it shows up reliably enough in research that food preferences, taken together with other signals, can actually add meaningful information to a personality profile. Social media behavior has proven to be another surprisingly transparent window. Studies examining how people use Facebook, now dating somewhat, but still instructive as a research context, found clear personality signatures and patterns of use. Extroverts tend to post more frequently, to share more broadly, to use social media as an extension of their social lives. Narcissistic traits are associated with a focus on self-presentation, carefully curated profile photos, frequent status updates centered on personal achievements. Neuroticism shows up in patterns of emotional expression online, in a greater tendency to share anxiety or seek reassurance. Conscientious people tend to use social media more deliberately and less impulsively. What makes these findings particularly interesting is that people are often not aware of how much they are revealing. Social media feels, to many users, like a controlled stage, a place where they choose what to share and manage how they appear. And in the conscious sense, they are making choices. But the aggregate pattern of those choices, accumulated over time, is harder to control than any single post. The overall shape of how someone uses social media reflects personality in ways they may not intend and may not even recognize. Even the speed at which a person types has been found to carry personality information. Researchers studying digital communication discovered that people tend to type faster when interacting with someone they like or feel positively toward. The emotional warmth of a relationship, it turns out, is expressed not only in what is said, but in the physical rhythm of how it is delivered. A message typed quickly, with energy and responsiveness, even before the words are read, carries a signal. And the people receiving those messages often sense that signal, even if they couldn't articulate exactly what they are responding to. Then there's the strange and tender pull of familiar music. Studies have found that approximately 70% of people report a strong preference for songs they associate with significant personal memories. Not necessarily the best songs, not the most technically accomplished, not even their conscious favorites, but the ones that carry an emotional timestamp, the ones that were playing during a specific moment that mattered. This preference for memory-laden music is not simply nostalgia in its casual sense. It reflects something deeper about how human beings process meaning. Music that carries personal memory activates not only the auditory processing regions of the brain, but also areas associated with emotion, autobiographical memory, and reward. It creates a kind of resonance that purely aesthetic appreciation cannot match. And the personality dimensions most strongly associated with this effect, openness, emotional sensitivity, a rich and accessible autobiographical memory, suggest that the people most deeply moved by the music of their past are also, in a very real sense, the ones living most vividly in relationship with their own history. This connects to a broader principle in psychology known as the mere exposure effect. Simply put, we tend to like things more the more familiar they are. Exposure, by itself, generates positive feeling, not through any conscious evaluation, but through the accumulated comfort of recognition. A song heard 50 times feels safe and pleasurable in a way a new song simply cannot, regardless of objective quality. And this extends well beyond music. Foods, faces, words, places, styles of art, familiarity reliably drives preference across almost every domain researchers have studied. There is something deeply human about finding comfort in the known. Our brains are, among other things, pattern recognition machines, and the smooth ease of a recognized pattern generates a quiet pleasure all its own. But here is where personality introduces an important divergence. People who score high in openness to experience, who are, by nature, drawn to novelty, complexity, and the unfamiliar, show a noticeably weaker mere exposure effect than those lower in openness. The comfort of familiarity still exists for them, but it competes more actively with the pull of the new. And in certain domains, novelty wins. This plays out in an intellectually striking way. Research has found that people with higher general cognitive ability tend to abandon familiar methods and approaches more quickly when they encounter new and more effective ones. Where others cling to a trusted strategy simply because it is known, higher ability individuals are more willing, and perhaps more naturally inclined, to update their approach in light of new information. They are less bound by the comfort of the familiar and more oriented toward what actually works. This doesn't mean that flexibility is always a virtue, or that loyalty to proven methods is always a flaw. There is wisdom in accumulated experience, and not every new approach is better than the one it replaces. But the research does suggest a meaningful personality and cognitive dimension along which people differ. Some are held more firmly by the gravity of the known, and some feel more freely the pull of what might be discovered beyond it. And when you step back and look at all of this together, the sleeping positions and the music and the food and the social media patterns and the typing rhythms, what emerges is a picture of personality as something genuinely pervasive. Not a label, not a category, but a living force that runs through everything a person does, coloring choices so small and so automatic that they barely register as choices at all. Who you are is present in how you sleep, what you eat, what you play, how fast you type to someone you love, and which songs make you stop whatever you are doing and simply feel something. Personality is not a room you enter on special occasions. It is the air you move through every single day, without ever noticing it is there. There is a particular kind of question that personality science eventually has to face, not just what personality is, or how it works, but what it actually does in a human life. What difference does it make, day to day, year to year, across the full span of a lifetime, to be the specific kind of person you are? The answers, it turns out, are more consequential than most people expect. But before arriving there, two findings from adjacent areas of research are worth sitting with, because they quietly challenge some of our most comfortable assumptions about motivation and creativity. The first concerns video games. For decades, gaming has been viewed with suspicion in many quarters, as a distraction, a time sink, a passive escape from more meaningful activity. But research has begun to complicate that picture considerably. Studies examining the relationship between video game play and creative thinking have found that gaming, particularly certain types of games, is associated with measurable increases in creativity. Games that require players to build, explore, solve novel problems, or navigate complex and unpredictable environments appear to exercise the same cognitive capacities that underlie creative thought in other domains. The lateral thinking, the willingness to experiment and fail and try again, the ability to hold multiple possibilities in mind simultaneously, these are not trivial skills. And for people already high in openness to experience, gaming may provide a particularly well-suited environment for those tendencies to flourish. The second finding is more unsettling, and touches on something fundamental about how we think about work and reward. It has been demonstrated repeatedly in psychological research that introducing external payment for an activity a person already finds intrinsically enjoyable can actually reduce their motivation to do it. This is known as the overjustification effect. When you begin paying someone for something they were doing freely, out of genuine interest or love for the work, the introduction of money can subtly shift their internal explanation for why they are doing it. The activity stops feeling like an expression of who they are and starts feeling like labor performed for compensation. And when the payment is reduced or removed, motivation can fall below its original level, lower than it was before payment was ever introduced. It is a finding with profound implications for how we structure education, workplaces, and creative life. The simple act of paying for effort can, under certain conditions, quietly erode the very thing it was meant to encourage. But it is the relationship between personality and the larger outcomes of a human life that carries perhaps the deepest resonance. Personality affects happiness. Not in a vague or general way, but in ways that are specific, measurable, and remarkably durable. Certain personality configurations are associated, across study after study, with higher levels of subjective well-being. Extroversion is one of the most consistent predictors of happiness. Extroverts tend to experience more positive emotion in daily life, to report higher life satisfaction, and to find social interaction rewarding rather than draining. Low neuroticism is another powerful predictor. People who are emotionally stable, who don't dwell excessively on negative events or catastrophize in the face of uncertainty, tend to maintain higher baseline levels of well-being across the years. These are not small effects. And they are not simply the result of extroverts and emotionally stable people having objectively easier lives. Even when researchers control for life circumstances, the personality differences in happiness remain. Something about the trait itself, the way it filters experience, the emotional tone it creates by default, has a direct effect on how pleasant or unpleasant daily life tends to feel from the inside. Optimism, which overlaps substantially with low neuroticism in certain facets of extroversion, carries its own remarkable associations. People who maintain a generally optimistic outlook, who expect things to work out, who interpret setbacks as temporary rather than permanent, who believe in their own capacity to influence outcomes, don't just report feeling better. They actually live better, in measurable physical terms, and they live longer. The research on optimism and longevity is striking. Optimists show lower rates of cardiovascular disease. They recover more quickly from illness and surgery. Their immune function tends to be more robust. Their health behaviors tend to be better. They exercise more, sleep more consistently, drink less, and are more likely to seek medical attention when something is wrong. Whether optimism drives these behaviors directly, or whether it does so through its effects on stress physiology, or some combination of both, the outcome is the same. A more optimistic personality is associated with a meaningfully longer and healthier life. Conscientiousness tells a similar story, and in some ways an even more striking one. Of all the big 5 personality traits, conscientiousness is the one most consistently linked to longevity. Conscientious people, those who are organized, disciplined, reliable, and careful, outlive their less conscientious peers by statistically significant margins. They make better health decisions over time, not because they are more afraid of illness, but because careful management of long-term outcomes is simply consistent with who they are. They take their medication. They keep their appointments. They build and maintain the habits, exercise, diet, sleep, stress management, that accumulate over decades into genuinely different health trajectories. And the relationship between personality traits and mortality risk extends beyond just conscientiousness and optimism. Researchers conducting large longitudinal studies, tracking thousands of people over many years, have found that personality assessed in midlife can predict risk of death from specific causes with meaningful accuracy. High neuroticism is associated with elevated risk across multiple health outcomes. Low agreeableness is linked to higher cardiovascular risk. Low conscientiousness predicts accident risk, among other things. Your personality, in other words, is not just a description of how you tend to feel and behave today. It is, in a very real sense, a health trajectory. a quiet biological forecast written in the way you characteristically engage with the world. In academic settings, conscientiousness has proven to be one of the most powerful predictors of success that psychology has identified. More powerful, in many studies, than intelligence alone. A highly intelligent student who is disorganized, impulsive, and struggles to sustain effort over time will often be outperformed by a somewhat less gifted student who is disciplined, reliable, and genuinely committed to their work. The conscientious student shows up. They complete the reading. They manage their time. They return to difficult material until it makes sense. And over the accumulated time of an academic career, those behaviors produce outcomes that raw cognitive ability cannot guarantee on its own. This finding has uncomfortable implications for how we think about education and meritocracy. We tend to reward intelligence, to identify and cultivate it, to treat it as the primary ingredient of academic achievement. And intelligence matters, genuinely and significantly. But conscientiousness may matter just as much, and it receives far less systematic attention. When it comes to the world of work, however, a different trait takes on new prominence. Extroversion turns out to be a stronger predictor of career success in many professional contexts than academic performance alone. The ability to build relationships, to communicate with confidence and warmth, to network effectively, to perform well in high-visibility situations, these are extrovert-friendly skills, and they translate into professional advancement in ways that grades on a transcript often do not. Extroverts are more likely to seek out leadership roles. They are more comfortable in negotiation. They create stronger first impressions in interviews. And in organizations that reward social fluency and visibility, these advantages compound over time. This is not to say that introverts cannot be extraordinarily successful. They clearly can, and often are. But the social architecture of many modern workplaces is built in ways that naturally favor extrovert tendencies, and the research reflects that structural reality. Sleep, too, falls within the reach of personality's influence. Research has found that people who report higher levels of happiness and positive affect tend to require slightly less sleep to feel rested and function well. The proposed mechanism relates to emotional processing during sleep. The brain uses a portion of sleep time to work through negative emotional experiences, consolidating and regulating them. People who carry a lighter emotional load into sleep may need less of this processing time, and wake feeling restored more quickly. It is a small but telling reminder that emotional life and physical life are not separate systems. What happens in the mind during the day shapes what the body needs at night. And at the far end of the emotional spectrum, the effects of persistent negativity are unambiguous. Chronic negative emotion, sustained anxiety, anger, hostility, despair, has direct and measurable effects on physical health. Not just in the sense that people who feel bad also tend to make worse health choices, though that is true, but at the level of physiology itself. Sustained negative emotional states are associated with elevated inflammation markers, with disruption to immune function, with higher levels of stress hormones that, over time, cause measurable damage to cardiovascular and neurological systems. Negativity, when it becomes the default emotional weather of a person's life, makes them genuinely, physically ill. This is not a judgment on people who struggle with depression or anxiety. Those are conditions, not character flaws, and they deserve care and compassion. It is simply a recognition that the emotional tone in which we live our daily lives is not separate from our bodies. It is registered by them, continuously, and the body responds. Taken together, these findings amount to something profound. Personality is not cosmetic. It is not a surface quality that makes some people more pleasant to be around or more interesting to talk to. It reaches into the deepest workings of a human life, into health and longevity and professional achievement and the quiet daily experience of whether existence feels worth living. The way you are characteristically inclined to feel, to think, to approach effort and difficulty in other people, it matters in ways that are not symbolic or poetic, but biological and measurable and real. Who you are, it turns out, is not just something you experience. It is something your body lives with every single day, for the entirety of your life. Love is one of those experiences that resists, almost defiantly, being reduced to anything smaller than itself. And yet science has tried, carefully, respectfully, and with genuinely illuminating results. When researchers place people who describe themselves as deeply in love inside brain imaging machines and show them photographs of their partners, what lights up is not simply the emotional centers of the brain, as one might expect. The patterns of activation look remarkably similar to those seen in people experiencing the effects of certain euphoric substances. The reward circuitry fires. Dopamine systems surge. Areas associated with motivation and goal-directed behavior become intensely active. True love, it turns out, is not merely a feeling. It is a neurological state, one of the most powerful motivational forces the human brain is capable of generating. When people say love changes everything, they are describing something that is, in a very literal sense, happening in the brain. And attraction, the force that draws people toward love in the first place, is shaped by more factors than we tend to consciously recognize. Laughter is one of them. Research has consistently found that people who laugh easily, who create moments of genuine shared humor, are rated as significantly more attractive by those around them. Not the performance of laughter, the social laugh, the polite chuckle, but the real kind, spontaneous and unguarded. Shared laughter signals safety. It signals that two people are perceiving the world in a compatible way, that they are on the same frequency, that being together feels easy rather than effortful. In the early stages of a relationship, the frequency of genuine shared laughter is one of the more reliable indicators of whether a connection will deepen or fade. Altruism, too, turns out to carry a surprising kind of attractiveness. Studies examining the relationship between prosocial behavior, helpfulness, generosity, genuine care for others, and sexual and romantic desirability have found a consistent pattern. People who demonstrate genuinely helpful, cooperative, other-oriented behavior tend to be rated as more attractive by potential partners, and they report higher levels of sexual activity. Kindness, it seems, is not merely a moral virtue. It is a reproductive signal, one that communicates something important about a person's capacity for commitment, cooperation, and investment in others. We are drawn, at some level, to people who make the world around them a little better. The trait has been selected for, across evolutionary time, because partners who are genuinely oriented toward others make better allies, better parents, better companions across the long and uncertain arc of a shared life. When it comes to who we actually end up with, the research tells a nuanced story. There is a popular idea that people seek out partners similar to themselves, that we are drawn to those who share our values, our temperament, our ways of seeing the world. And there is truth in this, particularly when it comes to values, beliefs, and broad lifestyle compatibility. But when researchers look specifically at personality traits as measured by the Big Five, the degree of similarity between romantic partners is actually quite modest. The assortment, the technical term for how similar partners are to each other in personality, is surprisingly minimal. People do not reliably choose partners who are their personality twins. The overlap is real but small, suggesting that while we may prefer certain broad qualities in a partner, personality similarity is far from the primary engine of romantic selection. What matters far more, the research suggests, is what happens once a relationship is established. Supportive relationships have a genuine effect on personality itself. People who are in consistently warm, secure, and mutually supportive partnerships tend to show measurable increases in positive personality traits over time. Conscientiousness tends to grow. Agreeableness deepens. Emotional stability improves. The security of a good relationship creates the conditions in which people can become, slowly and incrementally, slightly better versions of themselves. Personality is not fully fixed in adulthood. It continues to be shaped, gently but meaningfully, by the quality of the relationships we inhabit over decades. There are also subtler, less examined differences in how personality and emotion express themselves across gender, differences that are consistent enough in research to be worth understanding clearly, even while recognizing the enormous variation that exists within any group. The average woman, across studies of emotional expression, smiles approximately 60 times per day. This is not simply a cultural performance, though social expectations certainly play a role, but reflects a broader pattern of more frequent and more openly expressed positive affect. Smiling more often is associated with greater social connectivity, with higher reported relationship satisfaction, and with certain measurable health benefits. It is a small behavioral signature of a broader emotional orientation. In the domain of deception detection, the ability to recognize when someone is lying, women tend to outperform men in controlled studies. The proposed reasons are multiple. Women, on average, show greater sensitivity to nonverbal emotional signals, the microexpressions, the subtle incongruencies between what is said and what the body reveals, the slight mismatches in tone and content that often accompany dishonesty. Whether this greater sensitivity is primarily biological or primarily the result of socialization that rewards attentiveness to social and emotional cues, or some combination of both, remains a matter of ongoing research. But the behavioral difference is consistent. Another consistent finding relates to how women tend to respond to emotional pain. Approximately 80% of women, when surveyed about their coping responses to distress, report a preference for silence and withdrawal over verbal expression or confrontation. This runs counter to a common cultural narrative that positions women as more verbally expressive in emotional situations. And while expressiveness is certainly present, and higher on average in women than in men, it coexists with a powerful tendency to turn inward, to process privately, to absorb pain quietly before deciding whether or how to share it. Pain, for many women, is first a private experience before it becomes, if ever, a communicated one. And then from the landscape of relationships and emotion, the focus shifts to something older, deeper, and in many ways more primal. The traits that make up a person's personality don't merely shape their preferences or their relationships. They exert a strong and measurable influence on behavior across almost every domain of life. This may sound obvious, of course who you are shapes what you do, but the strength and consistency of this influence, as documented in research, is actually more significant than most people intuitively assume. Traits don't just nudge behavior at the margins. They shape it at the level of what a person notices, what they are drawn toward, what they find threatening, and how they interpret the same situation that another person might read entirely differently. Two people standing in the same room, facing the same circumstances, with the same objective information available, will often behave quite differently, not because one is more rational or more informed, but because their trait-based tendencies are shaping what they perceive and what they feel compelled to do about it. Fear is one of the most illuminating examples. Researchers studying anxiety have identified a specific pattern that appears with remarkable consistency across different anxiety disorders and across people who simply score high in trait anxiety without meeting clinical thresholds. It is a sensitivity not to specific, concrete threats, not a fear of spiders, or heights, or a particular social situation, but to uncertainty itself. The fear of the unknown. The discomfort, sometimes the agony, of situations where the outcome cannot be clearly predicted, where the future is opaque, where the right answer is not available. People high in trait neuroticism, the personality dimension most closely associated with anxiety, show a reliably heightened response to ambiguity. The brain's threat detection systems, in these individuals, do not require a clear and present danger to activate. The mere absence of certainty is sufficient. When the situation is unclear, the anxious brain fills that void with threat. It imagines the worst because imagination, in the absence of information, is all that it has. This is not irrationality. It is, in evolutionary terms, a strategy that made very good sense for most of human history. In environments where uncertainty often did signal danger, where the unfamiliar often was threatening, where erring on the side of caution genuinely improved survival odds, a brain that responded strongly to the unknown was a brain that kept its owner alive. The problem is that this ancient calibration is poorly matched to modern life, where uncertainty is constant and usually benign, and where treating every ambiguous situation as a potential threat generates an enormous amount of suffering for no protective benefit. Understanding this, understanding that anxiety is often not a response to a specific danger but to the fundamental uncertainty of existence itself, changes how one might approach it. It is not always a question of identifying the thing that is feared and confronting it. Sometimes it is a question of developing a different relationship with not knowing. Of learning, slowly and with great patience, to be less frightened by the simple fact that the future cannot be seen. Personality shapes how easily or how difficultly that learning comes. Some people are built with systems that quiet naturally in the face of ambiguity, that can rest in uncertainty without needing to resolve it. Others are built with systems that fire insistently, that demand resolution, that experience the unknown as an almost physical discomfort until it is transformed into something certain. Neither configuration is a character flaw. They are different ways of being human, each with its own strengths and its own particular challenges. In understanding your own configuration, recognizing the specific architecture of your fears and your responses, is the beginning of working with yourself rather than endlessly, exhaustingly, against yourself. Which is perhaps the deepest promise that personality science quietly holds out. Not that knowing yourself will make life easier, exactly. Not that it will dissolve anxiety or guarantee happiness or smooth away the genuine difficulties of being alive. But that it might, with time and honesty, and a certain willingness to look clearly, make you more legible to yourself. More able to recognize your own patterns before they run away with you. More capable of the kind of compassionate self-understanding that is, in the end, the foundation of every other kind of understanding. Anxiety is uncomfortable almost by definition. It tightens the chest, narrows the field of vision, fills the mind with circling thoughts that return again and again to the same unresolved edges. And in a culture that increasingly treats discomfort as something to be eliminated as quickly as possible, anxiety is often framed purely as a problem, something wrong, something broken, something that needs to be fixed. But the science tells a more complicated and more interesting story. Anxiety has a function. A genuine, important, evolutionarily preserved function. At its core, anxiety is a preparation system. It is the mind and body entering a heightened state of readiness in anticipation of something that might require a response. It sharpens attention. It mobilizes energy. It directs cognitive resources toward potential threats before those threats have fully materialized. In situations of genuine danger or genuine high stakes, a moderate degree of anxiety improves performance. It keeps a person alert, focused, and motivated in ways that a completely calm, unbothered state might not. The problem is not anxiety itself. The problem is when the system activates in the wrong proportions, in the wrong contexts, and cannot find its way back to rest. People who score high in trait neuroticism, the personality dimension most closely associated with emotional reactivity and anxiety, show a particularly striking pattern when they are not actively engaged in any task. When the mind is allowed to wander, most people drift toward relatively neutral or even pleasant thoughts. But for high neuroticism individuals, idle mental time tends to be captured by problems. By unresolved concerns, replayed conversations, anticipated difficulties, things that went wrong and things that might yet go wrong. The resting mind, for these individuals, is not resting at all. It is working, turning over the same material, looking for solutions that idle rumination is poorly equipped to find. This tendency is not chosen. It is a default mode of the neurotic brain, one that appears to be deeply rooted in how certain neural systems are calibrated. And understanding it as a feature of personality, rather than a personal failing or a lack of willpower, changes how it can be approached. Overthinking, which is closely related, is worth examining carefully because it is so widely experienced and so often misunderstood. Overthinking is not, at its root, a thinking problem. It is a fear problem. The endless cycling through possibilities, the inability to reach a decision and stay there, the compulsive revisiting of scenarios already past, this is not the mind being unusually thorough. It is the mind trying to control outcomes through mental effort alone. Trying to think its way to certainty in situations where certainty is simply not available. And because certainty is rarely fully available, the thinking never quite finishes. There's always one more angle to consider, one more possibility to weigh, one more version of events to rehearse. The connection between overthinking and depression is well established in research. Prolonged ruminative thinking, particularly the kind focused on negative events, personal failures, or bleak future projections, is one of the most consistent psychological precursors to depressive episodes. It is not simply that depressed people think more negatively. It is that the pattern of thinking itself, the cyclical, self-referential dwelling, actively deepens and prolongs negative emotional states. The mind, in trying to solve the problem of feeling bad, often ends up making the feeling worse. This is one of the cruelest aspects of the anxious and depressive mind, that its most natural strategies for coping are often the very strategies that deepen the difficulty. In the landscape of clinical psychology, personality disorders represent the territory where personality traits have become so extreme, so rigid, and so persistently distressing that they significantly impair a person's ability to function and to relate to others. And for a long time, different personality disorders were studied largely in isolation, each one treated as its own distinct category with its own distinct profile. But more recent research has begun to reveal something important underneath that apparent diversity. Across the full range of personality disorders, from narcissistic to borderline to obsessive-compulsive to paranoid, a single underlying trait appears with striking consistency. A trait sometimes described as general personality pathology, or sometimes framed in terms of negative emotionality and interpersonal dysfunction. Whatever name it carries, it points to the same finding, that the various personality disorders, for all their surface differences, share a common core. They are, in a sense, different expressions of the same underlying dimensional vulnerability, shaped into different forms by different developmental histories, different temperaments, and different circumstances. This is a finding with significant implications for how personality disorders are understood, diagnosed, and treated. If the disorders share a core, then treatments that address that core, rather than each disorder's specific surface features, may be more broadly effective than the field has previously recognized. Imposter phenomenon sits in an interesting space, not a disorder, not a pathology in the clinical sense, but a persistent psychological experience that affects a surprisingly large number of people, including many who appear, from the outside, to be highly competent and successful. The experience is familiar to many, a persistent private belief that one's achievements are not truly deserved, that one has somehow fooled others into overestimating one's abilities, and that at any moment the deception might be discovered. research has found that imposter phenomenon is strongly associated with self-critical personality tendencies, with the internalized habit of applying a harsher, more skeptical standard to one's own performance than to anyone else's. People who are prone to imposterism are not necessarily less capable than their peers. They are often equally or more capable. But their internal measuring stick is calibrated differently, set at a level that genuine accomplishment somehow never quite reaches. The trait connection matters because it helps explain why imposterism is so persistent even in the face of repeated external evidence of competence. The issue is not a lack of data. The issue is the personality-level tendency to discount favorable data and weight unfavorable data more heavily. To attribute success to luck, to circumstance, to the failure of others to notice the truth, and to attribute failure to the essential inadequacy that has always been there, waiting to be exposed. Borderline personality disorder, one of the most complex and most misunderstood of the personality disorders, has been the subject of growing neuroscientific research. Brain imaging studies of individuals with BPD have found consistently reduced activity in regions of the prefrontal cortex, areas associated with emotional regulation, impulse control, and the ability to modulate strong feeling states before they become overwhelming behavioral responses. This reduced regulatory capacity helps explain some of the most characteristic features of the disorder: the intensity of emotional responses, the difficulty in returning to baseline once activated, the impulsivity that can accompany moments of emotional flooding. Importantly, these findings locate BPD partly in the biology of the brain, not as an excuse for behavior, but as an explanation of why certain responses feel so automatic and so irresistible to those experiencing them. Understanding that the regulatory systems are genuinely compromised, rather than simply unused or untrained, changes how the disorder can be approached with both compassion and effective intervention. Neuroticism more broadly, the personality trait, not the disorder, has been found to involve differences in how various brain networks communicate with each other. High neuroticism individuals show altered patterns of connectivity between the default mode network, which is active during self-referential thinking and mind-wandering, and the networks responsible for emotional processing and threat detection. The brain, in these individuals, is wired in a way that keeps emotional and self-referential processing more tightly coupled, so that thoughts about the self are more readily tinged with emotional valence, and emotional states are more readily interpreted through a self-referential lens. It is, quite literally, a different mode of neural organization. A different way of being connected inside. And from the architecture of anxiety and disorder, the inquiry now shifts to something broader and more philosophically weighted. The question of human nature. Are people, at their core, selfish? It is one of the oldest questions in moral philosophy, and one that personality science and evolutionary psychology have approached with a great deal of empirical seriousness. The honest answer, as research frames it, is nuanced, but the nuance leans in a direction that may feel uncomfortable. Human beings are, in their baseline motivational architecture, oriented towards self-interest. This is not a cynical claim. It is a biological one. Organisms that prioritize their own survival and reproduction, and by extension the survival of those genetically related to them, are the organisms that natural selection has consistently favored. Selfishness, in the broadest evolutionary sense, is not a flaw in human nature. It is one of its original design principles. And yet, and this is where the picture becomes genuinely interesting, human beings are also deeply, genuinely, and sometimes sacrificially cooperative. We help strangers at personal cost. We build institutions designed to benefit people we will never meet. We feel real distress at the suffering of others and real satisfaction when we alleviate it. These are not performances or calculations. They appear to be genuine motivational states. The resolution to this apparent contradiction lies in understanding that selfishness and altruism are not opposites in human psychology. They are both present, in varying proportions, calibrated by context, by relationship, by personality, and by the specific demands of any given moment. Human beings are capable of extraordinary generosity and extraordinary cruelty, often in the same day, sometimes toward the same person. We are not simply one thing. What personality does in this moral landscape is shape the proportions. People high in agreeableness are genuinely more other-oriented in their moment-to-moment motivations. People high in conscientiousness are more likely to hold themselves to moral commitments over time. People high in neuroticism may experience moral distress more intensely. And people low in agreeableness and high in narcissism may be more consistently oriented towards self-interest in ways that tip the balance away from cooperation and toward exploitation. Sarcasm, perhaps unexpectedly, enters this moral landscape in an interesting way. Research has found that people who tend towards sarcasm in their communication style are, on average, more honest than those who avoid it. Not more tactful, sarcasm is rarely that, but more truthful in the sense that they are less likely to engage in social performance for the sake of managing others' impressions. Sarcasm, at its core, is a way of expressing what one actually thinks while maintaining a layer of deniability, of saying the true thing while wrapping it in a form that softens the social risk. It is a slightly sideways form of honesty, but it is honesty nonetheless. People who use sarcasm frequently tend to score lower on measures of agreeableness and higher on measures of openness and directness. They are, in a consistent sense, less invested in being liked and more invested in being real. Which is not always comfortable for those around them, but which carries its own particular form of integrity. What emerges from this section of research, when you step back far enough to see its shape, is a portrait of human nature that is neither idealistic nor despairing. We are animals with deep biological drives towards self-preservation and self-interest. We are also beings capable of genuine moral feeling, of real compassion, of sustained sacrifice for the benefit of others. We are anxious, ruminative, sometimes disordered in our emotional processing, shaped by genetics and early experience in ways we did not choose and cannot fully escape. And we are, at the same time, more flexible, more capable of growth, and more resilient than any single description of human nature can capture. Personality tells part of the story. Biology tells part of it. Experience and culture and relationship tell the rest. In the fullness of any individual human being, the whole, living, contradictory, astonishing thing, always exceeds what any framework can entirely contain. The human mind is, among other things, a storytelling machine. It takes the raw and often chaotic material of experience and shapes it into something coherent, something that makes sense, something that confirms what was already believed to be true. And this tendency, so useful for navigating a complex world, has a shadow side that personality science and cognitive psychology have documented with uncomfortable precision. Confirmation bias is one of the most robust findings in all of psychological research. People do not simply remember the past as it occurred. They remember it as it fits. Memories are not recordings. They are reconstructions, rebuilt each time they are recalled, and in the rebuilding process they are quietly, unconsciously edited to align with existing beliefs, existing self-concepts, existing emotional needs. A person who believes they have always been unlucky will remember their failures more vividly and their successes more dimly than the actual record warrants. A person who believes a particular friend is unreliable will find that their memories of that friendship have gradually shifted to emphasize the moments of disappointment and soften the moments of warmth. This is not lying. It is not even, strictly speaking, a choice. It is simply how memory works, not as an archive but as a living, revisable narrative, continuously updated to remain consistent with the story we are currently telling about ourselves and the world. And confirmation bias does not operate only in memory. It shapes what we notice in the first place, which information we seek out, which arguments we find persuasive, and which we instinctively resist. The mind, in its drive toward coherence, becomes its own most devoted editor, cutting what doesn't fit, amplifying what does, and presenting the result as simply the truth. A related distortion operates at the level of how we perceive groups of people rather than individuals. When we look at groups to which we do not belong, social groups, ethnic groups, political groups, professional groups, we tend to perceive them as more uniform than they actually are. The members of our own group feel richly individual to us. We know their quirks, their contradictions, their particular histories. The members of other groups blur into a kind of collective sameness. They all seem to think alike, to behave alike, to want the same things. Psychologists call this the outgroup homogeneity effect, and it is one of the mechanisms that underlies prejudice, stereotyping, and the dehumanization that can precede genuine cruelty. When another group of people has been mentally reduced to a single undifferentiated mass, it becomes much easier to feel contempt for them, to dismiss their concerns, to treat them as representative of a type rather than as human beings with the same interior complexity that we know ourselves to possess. The implications extend into some of the darkest territory in human history. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments, conducted in the 1960s, demonstrated something that most people find deeply disturbing about human psychology, that ordinary people, under the right conditions of authority and institutional framing, will administer what they believe to be severe electric shocks to innocent strangers simply because a figure in a white coat tells them to continue. The majority of participants, ordinary men and women with no violent histories or apparent moral deficiencies, went further than almost anyone predicted they would. Not because they were cruel, but because the situation was constructed in a way that made compliance feel not only expected but obligatory. This finding has never stopped being disturbing. and it has never stopped being relevant. What the Milgram experiments revealed, along with Philip Zimbardo's later Stanford prison experiment and a range of subsequent research, is that situational factors account for a far greater proportion of what we might call evil behavior than our comfortable narrative of individual moral character would suggest. We like to believe that people who do terrible things are fundamentally different from us, that they possess some character flaw or moral deficiency that we do not share, and that in similar circumstances we would choose differently. The research challenges this belief directly and persistently. This is not to say that personality is irrelevant to moral behavior. It clearly is relevant. People high in agreeableness, empathy, and moral identity show measurably more resistance to situational pressures toward harmful behavior. But the strength of situational forces, authority, conformity pressure, diffusion of responsibility, gradual escalation, institutional framing, is consistently underestimated by almost everyone who hasn't personally experienced them operating at full intensity. The conditions in which people find themselves matter enormously. And understanding this is not an excuse for harm. It is a call to take seriously the environments we create and inhabit, because those environments are shaping behavior in ways that character alone cannot always overcome. Crisis conditions are a particularly important case. Research on human behavior during periods of social disruption, economic collapse, natural disasters, political instability, consistently finds that crises increase the vulnerability of populations to exploitation. Not because crises make people uniformly worse, but because they create conditions of desperation, confusion, and weakened institutional protection that those with exploitative tendencies are able to take advantage of more easily. The crisis doesn't create the exploiter, but it removes many of the social and legal barriers that ordinarily constrain exploitative behavior, and it creates the conditions of vulnerability in which exploitation finds its easiest purchase. This finding connects to something that personality research has illuminated about the darker end of the trait spectrum, people low in agreeableness and high in what psychologists call the dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, are not equally distributed in their impact across stable and unstable conditions. In stable environments with strong institutions and clear accountability, their behavior is more constrained. In unstable environments, those constraints loosen, and the consequences for those around them can be severe. Among the situational triggers that research has identified as carrying the highest risk of extreme violence, infidelity stands in a disturbing position. Studies of homicide patterns across many cultures have found that reactions to actual or suspected sexual infidelity are among the most consistent precipitating factors in intimate partner violence resulting in death. This is not a recent or culturally specific pattern. It appears across societies and across historical periods with a consistency that points to deep evolutionary roots, to the psychological mechanisms surrounding mate guarding and the intense emotional responses that perceived betrayal of sexual fidelity can trigger in certain personality configurations. Understanding this connection is not an endorsement of violence in any form. It is an acknowledgement that certain emotional triggers, interacting with certain personality traits in certain situational conditions, create risk profiles that can be identified, and therefore potentially interrupted, before the worst outcomes occur. In a very different but equally revealing corner of research, the relationship between personality and susceptibility to misinformation has been receiving growing attention. Studies examining who is most able to correctly identify deepfake media, artificially generated images and videos designed to appear authentic, have found that honesty and agreeableness predict something unexpected. Not accuracy, exactly, but confidence in one's judgments. People high in honesty, humility, and agreeableness tend to be more appropriately calibrated in their confidence about whether media is real or fabricated, less likely to be overconfident in wrong assessments. They approach ambiguous information with a kind of epistemic humility that serves them well in a media landscape increasingly populated with manufactured content. The personality trait, in other words, shapes not just moral behavior but the quality of one's relationship with truth itself. And then there is something quietly fascinating about the scientists who study these questions. Researchers have found that scientists' own personality traits and characteristic mental habits have a measurable influence on the theories they develop and the questions they find worth asking. A scientist high in openness tends to be drawn to broader, more integrative theoretical frameworks. One higher in conscientiousness may be more attentive to methodological rigor and more skeptical of sweeping claims. Someone higher in neuroticism might be particularly attentive to what can go wrong, to edge cases and alternative explanations. The human doing the science is never fully separate from the science being done. Personality shapes curiosity, and curiosity shapes knowledge, and knowledge, inevitably, inescapably, is filtered through the particular mind that seeks it. This is not a flaw in the scientific enterprise. It is simply a reminder that science is a human activity, conducted by humans with their own traits and tendencies, and that awareness of this adds rather than subtracts from its integrity. And now, from the study of human personality, the inquiry extends outward into something that many people find both surprising and quietly moving. Humans are not the only animals with personalities. This is no longer a fringe claim or an exercise in sentimental anthropomorphism. It is a finding supported by decades of careful comparative research, conducted across an enormous range of species. Chimpanzees show consistent individual differences in boldness, sociability, and curiosity. Octopuses, solitary, short-lived, and neurologically utterly unlike mammals, show stable individual differences in how they approach novel objects and unfamiliar situations. Birds, fish, spiders, and even insects have been found to show consistent individual behavioral tendencies that meet the scientific criteria for personality. The dimensions along which animal personalities vary don't always map neatly onto the human Big Five. But certain themes recur across species with striking regularity. Boldness versus shyness, the tendency to approach versus avoid novel or potentially threatening stimuli, appears in virtually every species that has been studied. Sociability, aggression, and curiosity are others that show up again and again across the animal kingdom, in creatures separated from humans by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary divergence. What this tells us is that personality, as a biological phenomenon, is ancient. It predates language, culture, and conscious self-reflection by an enormous span of time. Individual differences in behavior, and how cautious or curious or aggressive a given animal tends to be, have been present and functional across evolutionary history, presumably because populations benefit from containing a diversity of behavioral types rather than every member responding identically to every situation. Domestic pets bring this finding closest to home, in the most literal sense. Cats and dogs, the two species that share daily life with human beings more intimately than almost any others, show personality structures that bear a genuine resemblance to the human Big Five. Dogs show dimensions corresponding to extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, and something resembling conscientiousness in terms of responsiveness to training and routine. Cats show dimensions including sociability, dominance, impulsiveness, and openness to experience. And pet owners, when asked to describe their animals' personalities, show a level of consistency and accuracy that suggests they are reporting something real, stable behavioral tendencies in their animals that persist across situations and across time. The bond between humans and their pets is, in part, a bond between personalities. We are drawn to animals whose temperaments complement or resemble our own. We are moved by their individual characters. We grieve them, when they are gone, with a depth that reflects how completely they had become known to us, how fully their specific, particular, unrepeatable personality had woven itself into the texture of daily life. There is something humbling and something beautiful in the recognition that personality is not a human invention. It is a feature of life itself, one of the ways that living beings, across an astonishing range of forms, carry their individuality forward through time. Each one, in whatever form it takes, unmistakably and irreducibly itself. For most of human history, the question of whether personality could truly change was answered with quiet resignation. You were who you were. The shy child would become the reserved adult. The anxious teenager would carry that anxiety forward into every decade that followed. Personality was destiny, and destiny was fixed. Science has revised that view considerably. Not by dismissing the reality of stability, the research on that is clear and consistent, but by revealing that stability and change are not opposites. They coexist within the same person, across the same lifetime, in a relationship that is more dynamic and more hopeful than the old fatalistic view allowed. Personality traits can be cultivated. This is perhaps one of the most practically significant findings in all of personality research. While the broad contours of personality are substantially heritable and largely stable across adulthood, specific traits can shift in response to sustained, deliberate effort. People who consistently practice behaviors associated with extroversion, seeking out social situations, initiating conversations, engaging more openly with others, show measurable increases in extroversion over time. People who deliberately build habits of organization, planning, and follow-through show increases in conscientiousness. The brain is plastic in ways that extend beyond childhood, and personality, rooted as it is in neural patterns and habitual ways of processing the world, participates in that plasticity. This does not mean change is easy or quick. It is neither. But the finding that it is possible, that personality is not a sealed container but a living system capable of responding to sustained pressure, matters enormously to anyone who has ever felt trapped by their own characteristic patterns. Major life events play a particularly significant role in personality change. Marriage, parenthood, bereavement, serious illness, immigration, career transitions, sustained periods of therapy, experiences that fundamentally alter the structure of daily life and the demands placed on a person, can produce real and lasting shifts in trait levels. People who enter long-term committed relationships tend to show increases in conscientiousness and agreeableness over time. People who become parents often show shifts in emotional stability. People who survive significant loss sometimes emerge with deepened openness, a more considered relationship with what actually matters, a greater tolerance for uncertainty than they possessed before the loss found them. These changes are not guaranteed, and they do not always move in positive directions. Trauma can also entrench negative traits, can deepen neuroticism, can erode the openness that once defined a person. Major life events are powerful forces, and personality is not always stronger than they are. But here is something important to understand about the timescale of genuine personality change. Lasting trait-level change, the kind that represents a real shift in a person's characteristic patterns rather than a temporary adjustment in response to circumstances, tends to unfold over approximately a decade. Not months. Not a single transformative experience, however significant. A decade of lived experience, of repeated choices, of gradually rewired neural habits, of slow accumulated change that is often invisible in the day-to-day but becomes undeniable when a person looks back across 10 years and recognizes someone slightly but genuinely different from who they were before. This long time scale is simultaneously humbling and reassuring. Humbling, because it means that meaningful change requires a kind of patience and sustained commitment that our culture rarely celebrates. Reassuring, because it means that the small choices made every day, the habits built, the behaviors practiced, the environments chosen, are not trivial. They are the material from which a changed personality is slowly, quietly constructed. Alongside the question of deliberate change, certain substances offer a more immediate and more complicated window into how personality and cognition can shift. Alcohol is one of the most widely consumed psychoactive substances in the world, and its effects on personality and thinking are well documented. In the short term, alcohol reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region most responsible for impulse control, judgment, forward planning, and the regulation of social behavior. The result is a loosening of the characteristic traits that normally govern behavior. Inhibitions soften. Risk tolerance increases. Emotional responses become more immediate and less filtered. Empathy can diminish. Aggression can rise. What is less often appreciated is that alcohol doesn't simply suppress personality, it selectively suppresses the parts of personality that are most effortful to maintain. The social anxiety that keeps a person guarded in conversation is reduced. The conscientiousness that normally breaks impulsive decisions is quieted. What remains, and sometimes amplifies, are the more raw and less regulated versions of underlying traits. In this sense, alcohol doesn't reveal a hidden true self so much as it reveals a particular partial version of the self, one from which the careful, considered, socially calibrated layers have been temporarily removed. Repeated heavy alcohol use over time does something more lasting. chronic alcohol exposure is associated with changes in personality that persist even during periods of sobriety, increased neuroticism, reduced conscientiousness, changes in emotional processing. The brain, shaped by sustained chemical influence, begins to reorganize in ways that alter the personality it produces. This is perhaps one of the more sobering illustrations of the principle that who we are is partly a function of what we consistently do to our own neurology. From chemical influences on the brain, the picture shifts to something far more benign and genuinely surprising. The tryptophan found in bananas, an amino acid that serves as a precursor to serotonin in the brain, has been linked to mood elevation and a subtle increase in feelings of happiness and calm. Tryptophan is found in many foods, not only bananas, but the banana has become a particularly well-known example because the association is real and the mechanism is understood. The body converts tryptophan into serotonin, and serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters most centrally involved in the regulation of mood, emotional stability, and a general sense of well-being. This is not a dramatic effect. Eating a banana will not transform a person's emotional landscape. But it is a reminder of something worth sitting with, that the boundary between brain chemistry and personality, between what we eat and how we feel and therefore how we characteristically behave, is more permeable than we tend to assume. Personality is partly biology, and biology is partly what we put into our bodies, and what we put into our body shapes, in small but real ways, the person we are on any given day. Research into cognitive performance across gender has consistently found that women, on average, show advantages in certain categories of mental tasks, particularly those involving verbal memory, attention to detail, fine motor precision, and certain aspects of social cognition. These are average differences, with enormous overlap between groups, and they do not speak to overall intelligence or intellectual worth. But they are consistent enough across studies conducted in many countries to be considered genuine rather than artifactual. What makes these findings interesting from a personality perspective is the degree to which cognitive style and personality style overlap. The attentiveness to social and emotional information that contributes to higher average scores on certain social cognition tasks is associated with personality traits, with higher average agreeableness, higher empathy, a greater default orientation toward the inner lives of others, that research has also found to be somewhat more prevalent, on average, among women. Personality and cognition are not separate systems. They are deeply intertwined, and the differences that appear in one domain often have roots that run through the other. And then there's Albert Einstein. Einstein is perhaps the most iconic figure in the history of modern science, a symbol of intellectual transcendence, of the human mind at the outermost edge of its reach. And yet he was a late language developer. By contemporary standards, he would likely have met criteria for a language delay. He did not speak fluently until the age of 3 or 4. He struggled in certain academic contexts. He failed his first university entrance examination. What Einstein possessed in extraordinary measure was not the kind of intelligence that school systems are designed to recognize and reward, but something more specific and more unusual, a capacity for sustained, deeply visual, almost playful abstract thinking, combined with an almost compulsive patience for sitting with questions that no one else thought were worth asking. He was, by all accounts, profoundly curious in a way that was inseparable from his personality, from the particular, specific, irreducibly individual way his mind engaged with the world. His example is worth carrying into the final movement of this journey, because it illuminates something important. Intelligence and personality are not separate from each other. The way Einstein thought was not merely a cognitive style. It was an expression of who he was, of his curiosity, his independence, his willingness to hold a question for years without demanding a premature resolution. His science was, in the deepest sense, an expression of his personality. And now, at the end of this long and layered exploration of what personality is and what it does, it feels right to return to the findings that have carried the most weight, to hear them again, briefly, not as facts in isolation but as pieces of a single coherent picture. More than 155 distinct personality traits have been cataloged beyond the Big Five, a reminder that the map we use to navigate human personality is still, in many ways, a rough sketch of a territory that is far more detailed and far more strange than our current frameworks can fully capture. Over 200 genetic loci have been identified as contributing to personality differences between people. Thousands of individual genetic variants, distributed across the entire genome, combining in patterns of almost incomprehensible complexity to produce the specific and unrepeatable person that each of us is. The way a person uses social media reflects their personality in patterns they often don't consciously intend: their posting frequency, their emotional expression, the careful curation or casual openness of their self-presentation, all of it adding up to a behavioral signature as readable, to those who know how to look, as a fingerprint. Human beings can detect aspects of each other's personalities through scent, a finding that points to how deep and how ancient the mechanisms of social perception truly are, operating below the level of language, below the level of conscious awareness, in regions of our biology that predate civilization by millions of years. Personality predicts life outcomes with a power that rivals intelligence, health and longevity, relationship quality, professional achievement, emotional well-being across a lifetime. The characteristic way a person engages with the world is not cosmetic. It is consequential, in ways both large and small, across every domain of a human life. And personality includes both nature and nurture, not as competing forces but as collaborators. The genes set a range. The environment shapes what within that range is expressed. The culture and the relationships and the experiences and the choices and the accumulated weight of years all leave their mark. And the result, across a lifetime, is something that is both deeply given and continuously made. Which brings us, finally, to the simplest and perhaps the truest definition. Personality is the characteristic way each human being thinks, feels, and behaves. Not the occasional way. Not the performed way, or the aspirational way, or the way a person appears to others in carefully managed moments. The characteristic way. The pattern that persists. The thread that runs through everything, through sleep and music and memory and love and fear and moral choice and daily habit and the quiet interior weather of a Tuesday afternoon when nothing particular is happening and a person is simply, unremarkably, themselves. That characteristic pattern is both more genetically rooted and more environmentally shaped than most people intuitively believe. It is more stable across a lifetime than we tend to think, and more capable of genuine change than the old view of fixed character allowed. It is written in genes, and in early experience, and in the relationships that shaped us, and in the choices we have made, and in the choices that were made for us before we were old enough to choose anything at all. It expresses itself in the enormous and the infinitesimal, in how a person faces grief and in how they hang their toilet paper roll. It is present in their music and their food and the way they move through a crowded room. It radiates outward through their face and their voice and the chemical information in their scent. It is readable, to those paying close enough attention, in the very rhythm of how they type. And it is shared, in its fundamental structure, with every other human being on the planet, and with the animals, too, who have their own versions of boldness and curiosity and sociability, their own particular ways of being alive in the world. The study of personality is, at its heart, the study of what makes each person irreducibly themselves. And that study, patient, rigorous, endlessly surprising, is also a kind of extended act of attention to the extraordinary fact of human individuality. To the reality that within the sheer architecture of a species, within the same basic biology and the same fundamental emotional repertoire, something as vast and as varied as the full range of human personality has somehow managed to exist. 7 billion people, each carrying their own characteristic pattern. Each one a genuinely unique arrangement of ancient traits. Each one thinking, feeling, and behaving in a way that has never quite existed before and will never quite exist again. That is what personality is. And there is something quietly remarkable about the fact that science, with all its rigor and its data and its careful measurement, has not made this truth smaller or more mechanical. If anything, it has made it more wondrous. Because the closer you look at what personality actually is, at its genetic depths and its neural architecture and its evolutionary roots and its daily expressions, the more astonishing it becomes that any two people manage to understand each other at all. And the more grateful you might feel, lying here in the quiet of this moment, for the particular and unrepeatable arrangement of traits that is yours. The thoughts that come naturally to your mind. The feelings that rise most readily in your chest. The characteristic way you move through your one specific life. That is your personality. And it has always, in every small and large way, been entirely your own.